The story begins with a young, disheveled man, panting and in despair. His inner monologue reveals a life of worthlessness, defining what it means to be a slave. He thinks back on his life, realizing he's never had anything of value. Chapter 1 is titled 100 Slaves. A defiant image of the young man is shown, emphasizing the theme of being perpetually and violently controlled, setting a grim tone for the journey ahead. The scene is set on a massive ship navigating through a tumultuous sea. The narration reinforces the slave's plight: owning anything is forbidden, so they have nothing. On the deck, a large group of slaves are shackled together. A man in a captain's hat, the Thuyan Truong, looks over them, remarking that this is their biggest shipment yet, 100 slaves. The Thuyan Truong discusses their route with a young, worried-looking Tui Thursday. The Tui Thursday expresses his fear about passing through the Allowed Zone, a stretch of water rumored to be cursed and home to a mythical beast that demands sacrifices. The Thuyan Truong dismisses the Tui Thursday as superstitious fears. He coldly explains that the dangerous reputation of the area is an advantage, as it means no warships or pirates will dare to approach them, making it perfect for their needs. Suddenly, the young man from the beginning is discovered as a stowaway. He's tied up as the crew points their blades at him. When the Thuyan Truong is notified, he glances back with indifference and orders his men to see to it, implying they should kill him. As a crew member raises his weapon, some of the other slaves cry out in protest. A pregnant woman with dark hair tells them to stop, insisting the stowaway is just a kid. The Thuyan Truong looks on, annoyed by what he perceives as foolishness. The Thuyan Truong coldly states that they left the harbor long ago and have no food to spare for a stowaway, only enough for his men and the 100 slaves. In an act of compassion, the pregnant woman steps forward and offers to split her portion of food. The stowaway looks up, shocked by her kindness. Inspired by her actions, other slaves also offer to share their rations. Annoyed and seeing it as a waste of time, the Thuyan Truong tells them to do whatever they want. The stowaway looks on, visibly conflicted by this unexpected display of solidarity. Having been spared, the stowaway is officially welcomed aboard, not as a guest, but as slave number 101. Later, below deck, the pregnant woman asks the stowaway why he snuck onto the ship. He explains that he heard one could earn a living on the continent, and his goal is to buy his own freedom and live his own life. The stowaway then asks why she helped him when there was no reason to. She smiles gently, explaining that because no one treats them with basic human decency, the slaves value compassion and lend each other a hand. She continues, stating that these small acts of kindness are what allow them to maintain their pride as human beings in a dehumanizing world. The woman shows a rusted, old dagger to a bald, elderly slave. She explains it was a gift from her husband a long time ago, but she didn't have the money to maintain it. Overhearing this, the stowaway asks for the dagger, offering to polish it for her. He says that if it's a simple blade, he can restore it, seeing it as a way to repay her for the meal. As he works, the old slave asks where he learned such a skill. The stowaway looks down, revealing that his mother sold him for a pittance when he was very little, and his master was a blacksmith. He continues his story, recounting the brutal life he led. He did all kinds of chores while covered in ash and soot, and his master would burn him with heated metal rods for even the slightest mistake. With a haunted look in his eyes, he confesses that one day, when it seemed his master was finally about to kill him, he grabbed a nearby grindstone and cracked his skull open. He turns away, his voice filled with sorrow, as he admits that he has never been treated with compassion by anyone, not even by his own mother. Focusing intently on restoring the blade, he says that because of his past, he doesn't know the first thing about concepts like compassion. He hands the beautifully restored dagger back to the woman. "Here, I'm done," he says, advising her to be careful with it and hide it well. Touched, she thanks him and asks for his name. The woman smiles warmly and introduces herself as Mira. In response, the stowaway, with a look of vulnerability, reveals his name is Julian. With their names exchanged, a genuine human connection is forged in the hopeless darkness of the ship. Later that night, the slave ship sails across the calm, moonlit sea. Below deck, the slaves rest uneasily, but for Julian and Mira, the shared moment of introduction opens the door for a deeper conversation, a brief respite from the hardship surrounding them. Continuing their conversation, Julian asks Mira when the baby will be born. Mira, cradling her stomach, guesses it might be around the time they reach the continent. In a gesture of trust, she invites a surprised Julian to feel her belly. As Julian places his hand on her belly, he feels the baby kick. He's taken aback, remarking that it feels strange. Mira smiles and explains that the baby is kicking because it's full of life. Looking at her belly with a gentle expression, Mira reveals her one and only hope for her baby to be born safe and sound, and to live a happy life. Julian listens, his expression filled with a mix of wonder and sorrow. Mira adds that if she can have that single wish granted, she wouldn't mind suffering for the rest of her life. Her selfless declaration leaves Julian stunned, as the concept of such maternal love is entirely foreign to him. Overwhelmed, Julian clutches his chest, a tight feeling constricting him. He tearfully confesses that his own mother sold him off, and for his entire life, he had believed that was normal. Mira looks on with concern. He tells Mira that now that he knows that mothers like her exist, the reality of his own past is incredibly hard to bear. In a comforting gesture, Mira reaches out and gently clasps his scarred hand. Seeing his distress, Mira pulls Julian into a warm embrace, holding him tightly as he trembles with the weight of his rediscovered sorrow. As she holds him, Mira speaks softly, acknowledging that he grew up in a cruel world and that it must have been rough. She urges him not to despair, offering the comfort he never had. Pulling back slightly to look him in the eyes, she tells him that from this moment on, she wants him to know a fundamental truth: even in a world as cruel as theirs, love and kindness do exist. With a final plea, she begs him not to give up on his fellow man. Her words break through Julian's walls of despair, and he weeps openly, finally feeling a sense of hope and human connection. Julian recalls the moment he felt the baby's kick, a movement that felt warm, a spark of life that touched him deeply. The memory solidifies his newfound connection as the ship continues its journey under the moonlight. The next day, a slave trader announces that it's cleaning time. Seeing Myra's condition, the old slave asks if she can be given a pass, but the trader retorts that those who don't work, don't eat. Julian steps forward, offering to do both his and Myra's share of the work. For his defiance, the slave trader strikes Julian across the face. Despite the blow, Julian holds his ground, insisting that he can work much harder than a pregnant woman and that the trader should let him do the job. The trader scoffs at Julian's virtuous act but agrees, warning him that if he slacks off, he'll be killed. Unfazed, Julian turns to a concerned Mira and tells her he wants her to rest, because he wants her to be happy when she has a safe delivery. Myra's eyes widen, and a look of sincere gratitude washes over her face. "Thank you," she says, deeply moved by his selflessness. In the background, the old slave and the trader look on with differing expressions. Later, during mealtime, a spirit of sharing continues. A young slave with spiky hair gives his bread to the no Lugia, urging him to eat properly as the oldest among them. The old slave looks hesitant to accept. The no Lugia proudly refuses the food, stating he hasn't stooped so low as to accept it from a kid. Seeing this, Julian offers his own water. Mir explains to Julian that the old man is essentially telling him it's okay for Julian to keep his rations. That night, Julian finds he can't sleep. He notices Mira is also awake, sitting up and humming a gentle tune to herself. Mir explains that carrying a child is tough. She feels nauseous if she lies down, so she gets more rest by sitting upright. Julian looks at her with pure admiration and says, "You're amazing, Mira." Mira is taken aback by his wholehearted praise, saying it's the first time anyone has said something like that to her. However, she modestly claims she doesn't deserve it and is not as amazing a mother as he might think. With a somber look, Mira reveals a painful part of her past. She tells a stunned Julian that she once had a son who was about his age. She recounts the tragedy: her son was killed by slave traders while trying to protect her and her unborn baby. With deep regret, she calls herself a mother who couldn't even save her own son, leaving Julian speechless. A bittersweet memory flashes through Myra's mind. To this day, she says with a sad smile, I still clearly remember his smile. Her voice thick with grief, Myra confesses that she feels like a failure as a mother for being unable to protect her first son. Yet, despite that crushing weight, she finds the strength to continue. Looking up with a fierce, sorrowful resolve, Myra explains that her first son gave his life to protect this unborn child. Carrying the heavy weight of that sacrifice, she says her only wish now is for this baby to be born safely. Despite her resolve, Myra admits she can't shake her anxiety. Looking at the filthy floor where they are forced to sleep, she wonders aloud if a baby born into a world like this could ever find happiness. Julian stands and gently reassures her. He explains that to a child, their parents mean the whole world. He tells Myra that he can see how much she loves her baby. He embraces her, saying that he is sure the baby she loves so dearly will find happiness, and that he is praying for their happiness too. Myra is moved to tears by his sincere words. Myra thanks him, her heart filled with gratitude. Julian then has a moment of realization. A mother doesn't cherish her child just because she is a mother, the connection is deeper than that. He understands that you start caring for another person when you feel a connection with them. And because his own mother sold him, he can sense the profound bond between Myra and her baby. As he sits alone in the dark hold of the ship, Julian reflects that he has never once experienced that irreplaceable bond that is supposed to exist between a mother and child. The realization leads him to a dark thought. Perhaps he will never be able to make that sort of connection for the rest of his life. That thought frightens him more than anything. The scene shifts as the sun sets, and a slave trader tells the slaves they won't get food until they've completed all their duties. Later that night, as Julian stands alone on deck, Myra calls to him. She gestures for him to come over, wanting to show him something breathtaking. Together, they gaze up at the night sky, a spectacular canvas of a star-filled galaxy stretching above them. It's a rare moment of peace and beauty in their grim lives. The camera pans up the ship's mast and rigging, set against the backdrop of the magnificent, star-dusted cosmos. Julian looks up, his hair blowing in the wind, completely captivated by the sight. Wow! Is all he can manage to say. Myra smiles, happy to have shared this moment with him. Hey, Julian, Myra begins, I was thinking, if we're ever liberated, and free to do whatever we want. With a bright, hopeful smile that shines even in the darkness, she asked him an unexpected question, why don't we live together? Julian is left utterly speechless. She adds that it would make her happy if he were by her side. Overwhelmed and flustered, Julian turns away from her earnest gaze. Julian shyly says he'll think it over. Myra lets out a cheerful laugh, and he thanks her, a promise of a potential future hanging in the air. The ship sails on, carrying this fragile hope. The quiet of the night returns. Below deck, the other slaves, including the old man and the spiky-haired youth, are fast asleep, exhausted from the day's labor. Suddenly, the peace is shattered. The ship lurches violently as a sailor screams a warning to the captain. They're getting swept up by the current and have been pulled into the dreaded all-out zone. The storm has arrived. Amidst a raging storm, the ship's captain stares at his map in frustration. He realizes they are nowhere near their intended route, complaining that he specifically chose a path to avoid this treacherous area. He violently smacks a young crewmate, shouting that something is trying to pull them in, a mysterious force dragging them off course. With a hardened gaze, the captain makes a decision. He orders all hands on deck. A bald, veteran crewman questions the command, pointing out that his own crew is more than enough to handle simple ship maintenance and asks why everyone was summoned. Without a word, the captain lunges forward, silencing the man's question with a knife to the chest. A brutal and swift act of violence. The deck falls into a stunned silence. The faces of the crew and slaves alike are painted with shock and horror, their eyes wide with disbelief. In stark contrast, a cruel, satisfied smirk spreads across the captain's face. As the stabbed man collapses, the other slaves cry out in terror. But the captain is unmoved, coldly stating, I told you. I despise them. Scum who go about their days without a single thought in their heads. He continues his chilling speech, calling the slaves a worthless bunch he bought for a cheap sum. As the dying man urges the others to run, the panel highlights the captain's intended targets, the sick, the elderly, children, and pregnant women. The captain reveals his monstrous plan. He declares the slaves are nothing more than defective goods. But if there's an accident, he can exchange them for insurance money. Since they are his property, this is simply the easiest way to make a profit. A wicked grin spreads across his face as he notes that not even military ships approach this part of the sea, meaning there is no risk of any witnesses. With his last breath, the dying crewman gasps for the others to get out. Panic finally erupts. The slaves begin to scream and scramble in terror. The captain watches the chaos unfold with sadistic glee, taunting them, come on. Use your brains for once in your lives. But there is nowhere to run. Shackled in the middle of the sea, the slaves are trapped. A young man named Julian desperately pulls a woman behind him, telling her to duck as the captain gives the order, damn fools. Kill them and throw them overboard. Absolute chaos descends upon the deck. The captain's crew follows his orders without hesitation, falling upon the defenseless slaves with brutal efficiency. The air fills with the sounds of screaming and tearing flesh. The massacre is swift and merciless. A woman's eyes widen in sheer terror as she watches the slaughter. Slaves desperately try to reach the lifeboats but are cut down, their bodies tossed into the churning, dark waves below. Soon, the deck is littered with the bodies of the slain. The crew begins tossing the corpses overboard into the stormy sea. The captain watches the grim scene unfold, a look of cold satisfaction on his face as he says, I'm impressed. Amidst the carnage, a young, dark-haired woman named Mira weeps while holding a fallen comrade. She realizes the truth of their final moments, every last one of them protected the pregnant woman and the kid. The captain callously stomps on a dead slave's head, declaring them all expendable scum. He orders his men to throw the rest into the sea. But just then, a loud boom echoes from the ocean, startling the crew and halting their work. A strange phenomenon occurs. One of the crew cries out to the captain that something is off, that he can't move his body. Julian and Mira look on in horror, noticing that the raindrops have frozen, suspended in midair. From the dark abyss of the sea, massive tentacles begin to rise, dwarfing the ship. Below them, the deck is a horrifying carpet of corpses. Julian and Mira can only huddle together, paralyzed by fear. The monstrous form continues to emerge from the water. Julian, the captain, and his remaining crewmen can only stare in absolute terror at the unbelievable apparition before them. The creature pulls its form from the sea and steps onto the deck of the ship. It's a horrifying, humanoid figure composed entirely of writhing, glistening tentacles. The tentacled entity looms over the survivors. Two great, dark voids open on its face as it speaks with a voice that is not a voice, asking a single, terrifying question, do you seek my blessing? Julian and Mira tremble in fear. The entity raises its tentacled hands and lays out its conditions. 1. You must sacrifice a large number of souls. 2. You must sacrifice a pure love. The entity explains that the first condition, the sacrifice of many souls, has already been fulfilled by the massacre. Now, the second condition can be fulfilled by either of the two of them. It tells them that they must be the ones to decide. It presents its grim ultimatum. One of you will be my sacrifice. One shall die, while the other shall be blessed and obtain great power. A terrible choice between life, death, and power. Julian, filled with terror and confusion, asks what the creature is. The entity dismisses the question as unimportant. It offers no explanation of its existence, only a promise, but what I take away, I grant in its stead. I will aid the one who remains. Looking down at the two terrified slaves huddled on the deck, surrounded by its dark tentacles, the entity poses the final, terrible question. Now, make your choice, it commands. Which one of you will lose your pure love? Julian's face is a mask of pure terror, his mouth agape in a silent scream. His gaze drops to his own stomach, his hands instinctively clutching it, mirroring Myra's earlier gesture of protecting her unborn child. With his eyes squeezed shut in anguish, Julian remembers the entity's promise. You said, the one left behind, will be saved, right? He collapses to his knees, his spirit broken, seemingly ready to accept his fate as the sacrifice. Julian stares into the swirling void of the entity and asks for confirmation. The entity replies, correct. My blessing should see them safe. Hearing this, Julian's resolve hardens. He rises to his feet and makes his decision, telling Mira, then I'll offer my life. You need to deliver your baby, no matter what. Turning his back on Mira, Julian begins to walk toward his doom, telling her, go and live a happy life. But Mira, kneeling on the deck, clenches her fist, refusing to accept his sacrifice. In a shocking turn, Julian looks back over his shoulder with a serene, almost detached smile. The expression is so out of place that it fills Mira with horror, her eyes widening in disbelief and fear. A brief flash of a memory, a smiling child, is interrupted as Mira lunges forward and grabs Julian's arm, stopping him in his tracks. On the blood-soaked deck, surrounded by the dead, she refuses to let him go. Panting and gasping for breath, a new, fierce determination burns in Myra's eyes. She holds a piece of cloth that she had kept hidden, vowing, I won't let this happen again. She lets the cloth fall, revealing a sharpened dagger she had concealed. Her expression is no longer one of a victim, but of a protector ready to do the unthinkable. In a desperate act of maternal love, Mira holds the dagger to her own pregnant belly. With tears in her eyes, she declares, I won't let another one of my children die. She has chosen to sacrifice herself. With a gentle, heartbreaking smile, Mira entrusts her unborn child to Julian's care. Julian, I leave your new sibling in your care, okay? As she prepares to plunge the blade, Julian screams and dashes toward her, trying desperately to stop the inevitable. In a chaotic explosion of blood and desperation, Julian's power awakens. As he screams that he won't let anything happen to her, dark, shadowy energy erupts from him, intercepting Myra's sacrifice. Mira retches, blood pouring from her mouth. It seems Julian's intervention has caused a fatal backlash. As he watches in horror, Julian's only thought is for the child, desperately begging it to be born and live, even if it costs both their lives. Through the darkness and the storm, a new sound cuts through the air, the cry of a newborn baby. Mira, bloodied but alive, sits on the deck, holding her child in her arms. Tears of joy and relief stream down Myra's face. In this moment of pure, unadulterated love, all the horror fades away as she gazes upon her crying child. Mira looks up at Julian, sharing the news, it's a girl. As Julian reaches out his hands, Mira looks down at her daughter with overwhelming love and says, I'll name her Diana. With the last of her strength, Mira pulls Julian and the baby into a hug, telling them both, I love you both, so much. But her body is failing, she begins to wobble and stagger as blood drips to the deck. Julian cries out her name as Mira collapses, her strength finally giving out. Her sacrifice is complete. Myra's body topples over the side of the ship, splashing into the stormy sea. As Julian watches in horror, the entity looms before him, stating, I am satisfied. Now state your wish. As Julian clutches baby Diana, he realizes the remaining crewmen can move again. They are no longer frozen. The entity's voice echoes in his mind, strength shall emerge from the pits of your despair. Ignoring the captain's taunts that they are all just expendable scum, Julian looks up with tears in his eyes, holding Diana tight. He makes his wish, I want proof. Proof that everyone's lives, that Myra's life wasn't a waste. Then you shall have it, the entity declares. A powerful boom echoes as dark energy erupts from Julian's eye, a sign that his wish is being granted. The entity tells the crew, you may move now. Seeing his chance, the captain orders his men to attack. Kill the kid and the monster, he screams, ever the opportunist, hoping to sell the octopus freak for a high price. As the crew charges forward, Julian's power explodes. A massive shockwave of dark energy erupts from him, blasting the attackers backward in a chaotic explosion. Julian groans in agony as he is consumed by a shroud of shadow. Black, vein-like marks erupt across his face and body, the immense power of the entity surging into him. The transformation is absolute, painfully remaking him from the inside out. The remaining crew lies broken on the deck, and even the captain can only stare in speechless shock. Julian lifts his hand, feeling an unnatural strength crackle through his very bones. He doesn't understand what's happening to him, a question that hangs heavy in the air, waiting to be answered. The entity explains the nature of Julian's new power. He has been granted the life force of the 100 slaves who died on the ship. Their combined power, endurance, speed, and reflexes have all been bestowed upon him. Julian looks over at the crying baby Diana, still swaddled, and tells her to wait just a little longer. He then turns to face the last of the captain's crew, his expression cold and determined. Driven by a mix of fear and greed, the remaining crewmen let out a final war cry and charge toward Julian. He simply stares back, his transformed eyes betraying no emotion. The fight is a one-sided massacre. Empowered by the souls of 100 slaves, Julian moves with supernatural speed and strength, tearing through the crewmen with his bare hands and shadowy tendrils. In a flurry of brutal, dark violence, Julian finishes off the last of the attackers. The deck is now completely silent, littered only with the bodies of the dead. Julian stands alone amidst the carnage, panting as the dark energy recedes. The battle is finally over. He turns to see baby Diana, floating safely in the air. He kneels down to gently take her into his arms, a wave of relief washing over him. But the danger is not over. In a moment of distraction, Julian is impaled from behind by a spear, the sharp point bursting through his neck. The attacker is the captain, who survived the slaughter. "You let your guard down, you fool," he cackles, believing he has won. Julian collapses, coughing up blood and darkness. The captain's victory is short-lived. To his horror, the spear piercing Julian's neck shatters. The wound heals instantly as Julian rises, wondering why he's still alive. The entity's voice echoes, "You have nothing to fear." The entity explains the full extent of its blessing. Since Julian inherited the life force of 100 slaves, it should go without saying that you've gained 100 lives as well. Terrified, the captain tries to bargain for his life, desperately offering Julian a share of his money. But Julian is unmoved, his expression cold. Julian coldly throws the captain's own words back at him, "How about you think with that head of yours?" He raises a fist, ready to deliver final judgment. The scene then shifts, showing Julian and Diana alone in a small boat on a vast, dark sea. From the safety of the small boat, Julian watches as the entity's massive tentacles wrap around the slave ship, crushing its hull and dragging the vessel of death beneath the waves. The entity delivers its final message. Because Julian offered the sea something he held dear, it will no longer harm him. The boat will reach the shore within a day, no rowing needed. With a final, "May fortune favor you," the entity disappears. Now truly alone, Julian looks down at the peacefully sleeping Diana. His gaze softens as he gently adjusts the clasp on her warm blanket. Under the vast, starry sky, Julian reflects on everything that has happened. A single tear traces a path down his cheek as a bitter, melancholic smile touches his lips. He whispers to the ocean, "My entire life. I've never had anything valuable in my possession." He curls into a ball, a small, lonely figure in a tiny boat on an endless sea. But as the sun begins to rise, casting brilliant rays across the water, Diana starts to cry. Julian looks up, his expression changing. Until now, that is. A new purpose is born in the dawn, marking the start of a true life, carrying the weight and will of 100 souls. A kind-looking man named Julian explains that babies can only express their needs by crying. He says they cry as hard as they can when they need someone, because they're frightened of being born into a world they know nothing about. Julian continues, saying that's why you need to hold them tight, smile, and soothe all their worries. You have to tell them, "I'll always be with you." He admits that it's strange, but saying those words calms him down too, making him feel like he's not alone. That kind of fulfilling happiness exists. As he speaks, the scene is swept away. The scene changes. Julian is in a small boat, holding a crying baby. He looks terrified as he tries to comfort the infant, telling it everything is alright. This is the start of Chapter 2, Sea Demons. Julian was promised smooth sailing, but now he's adrift in the open sea, surrounded by the wreckage of a ship. Suddenly, a monstrous fish-like creature emerges from the water. It speaks, saying it's envious. More creatures surface, talking amongst themselves, mentioning that her orders were not to harm them. One of the monsters, a massive octopus, calls them lowly landwalkers. It finds it unacceptable that she bestowed her blessing upon them. Clutching the baby, Julian stares in horror as one of the fish-like monsters declares its intent to kill and eat them, even if it means being punished for it. As a monster slithers onto the boat, Julian leaps in panic onto a larger piece of wreckage, trying to get away from the swarming creatures. Standing on the floating debris, Julian looks down at the sea demons. They continue their threats, telling him to know his place and that they will eat him. Julian realizes something. He points out that the monsters seem unable to leave the water, treating the wreckage he's on as land. If they could, they would have already attacked him directly. One of the creatures calls him a cocky brat as the swarm of monsters surrounds the wreckage he is standing on. A giant, single eye appears in the water. It belongs to the giant octopus monster, which informs Julian that its brethren have already begun to destroy the ship's bottom from below. It asks, "How long will that land of yours last?" The creature taunts him further, saying that before long, both he and the baby will become their food. Julian can only shiver in fear. Sweating and terrified, Julian looks down at the crying baby in his arms, feeling utterly helpless. As he looks at the group of people he once knew, a sudden resolve fills him. A strange, crack pattern appears over his eye as his determination to fight back awakens. With the baby now strapped to his back, Julian grabs a pole and launches himself toward the giant monster, ready to fight. Fueled by pure rage, he screams at the monster, challenging it to choke on the makeshift harpoon he's wielding. He leaps and thrusts the harpoon right into the giant sea demon's gaping mouth. As the monster screams, Julian relentlessly stabs at its head, ignoring the whipping tentacles around him. But the monster retaliates. One of its sharp tentacles pierces straight through Julian's chest, and he gasps, coughing up blood. The assault is merciless. Dozens of tentacles smack, slice, and slash at Julian's body, tearing him apart. Despite being thrown back and brutally wounded, Julian refuses to give up. He continues to slash wildly at the creature, fighting for his life and the baby's. The monster's attack intensifies, its sharp tendrils shredding Julian's body in a furious onslaught, leaving him completely overwhelmed. Barely conscious, Julian knows he can't keep up with the speed of the attacks. In a desperate, final act, he grits his teeth and grabs one of the tentacles, asking the monster, "How do you like this?" The monster is stunned as Julian, with his arm now blackened and monstrous, yanks hard on its tentacle. As the monster screams for him to let go, Julian, with a look of insane determination, grits his teeth and declares, "Like hell I will." He twists his weapon deeper into the creature's flesh, but his vision blurs and his body begins to feel strange. "What? My body?" He wonders as he starts to lose his senses. Julian realizes he's been poisoned. He slumps over as the monster reveals it knows about the 100 lives he possesses, claiming it was there when it happened. Julian glares helplessly as the monster taunts him, saying he will revive and die until all his lives are spent. It then commands him to sink to the ocean's depths and suffer as it swims away. As Julian's consciousness fades, the monster's voice continues to torment him, calling the peacefully sleeping baby a heavy burden thrust upon him. The creature sinks below the waves, asking Julian how a life bound by that heavy burden is any different from his old life as a slave. Its voice echoes in his mind, adding that it feels sorry for the baby too, who is now fated to live a life without its mother. The monster offers a tempting escape, telling the falling Julian that if he dies here, he can reunite with everyone he's lost. It explains that all things return to the sea in the end, and that the three of them, Julian, the baby, and its mother, can be together in death. As he sinks into the dark water, impaled and broken, Julian weakly reaches out, wondering if it's true that he'll see everyone again if he dies. He sees visions of the other slaves he knew, their ghostly faces appearing before him. He then sees a vision of Mira and wonders if he can finally be with her again. His mind flashes back to a snowy landscape. I never forgot that day, he thinks. I remember everything vividly, the tiny amount of silver coins in your hand, and the happy look on your face as you left. The traumatic memory continues. Mom, he thinks, remembering his younger self. I was just a child, but even back then, I understood. I knew I was being sold. He recalls watching her walk away, never once looking back. He remembers it all, the pain of his burns and the bitter, gnawing cold of being forced to sleep in a livestock barn during the harsh winter. He remembers his time on the slave ship, sailing under the pale light of the moon. But alongside the pain, he also remembers Myra's warmth, and the terrible anguish he felt when he lost her. A memory of her holding him close, sharing a blanket, surfaces in his mind. As he sinks deeper, he sees a figure reaching for him from the light above, a stark contrast to the darkness he's falling into. The figure is Mira, smiling warmly as she calls his name. Come join me. Julian. As his hand twitches, he weakly whispers her name. His mind drifts, his deepest longing rising to the surface. All I ever wanted was someone who wouldn't leave me all alone. The vision of Mira reaches out to him as the sea demons below continue to tear the wreckage apart. The crashing and crumbling of the wreckage startles the baby, who begins to wail loudly, its cries echoing across the water. Julian, lost in his memories, hears the sound. Hearing the baby's cry pierces through his haze of despair and brings him back to the present moment. She's crying, he thinks. His own words from a happier time come back to him, they have no other way. Babies can only express their needs by crying. The vision of Mira smiles at him, repeating his own wisdom. That's why they cry as hard as they can when they need someone. They're saying, please don't leave me all alone. Myra's words echo in his mind, and Julian sees an image of his younger, abandoned self alongside the crying baby. He finally understands. Their pain is the same. Julian's eye snaps open, burning with a new, fierce determination. The monster is shocked, realizing he's awakening from the illusion. The sea demon insists it's futile, that he can't move because of the poison. But Julian proves it wrong, bursting from the water in a flash. With newfound strength, he lands a devastating punch squarely on the monster's jaw. The monster reels back, stunned at how he's able to move. Julian, filled with righteous fury, grabs his harpoon and smashes its head with a sickening crunch. The monster wonders if he somehow expelled the poison. It doesn't have long to think, as Julian continues his brutal assault, slicing and cleaving its body. The great sea demon lets out a final, gurgling scream as Julian's attack proves fatal. The creature's massive body thrashes in the water as it dies, its reign of terror over. Julian stands victorious, his arm still transformed, surrounded by the remnants of the dead monster. He screams out the baby's name, Diana. Below, the smaller sea demons, enraged by their leader's death, swarm towards him, vowing to kill and eat him. With a defiant roar, Julian screams, "Out of my way," and dives headfirst into the frenzied horde, slashing a path through them. He becomes a whirlwind of destruction, a force of nature fighting to protect the one precious life he has left. The ocean erupts in a massive splash as Julian unleashes his fury upon the swarm of sea demons. Silence falls. The dark water is now littered with the floating corpses of the defeated monsters. The battle is over. In the aftermath, Julian, grievously wounded but alive, sits in the small boat, gently cradling the baby in his arms. "I'm sorry, Diana," he says, a faint smile on his bloody face. "I promise I'll always be with you." He has finally given her a name and a promise. Holding Diana, he looks out at the vast, empty sea. For the first time, he feels he is not alone. His boat drifts aimlessly, carrying the two survivors. After what seems like an eternity, he looks up and sees something on the horizon. It's the shore. "Look, Diana. We've reached land," he exclaims as the baby gurgles happily. As the boat slides onto the beach, he thinks to himself with weary relief, "Yeah. I've had enough of the sea too. A new land awaits, but they will brave it together." Continuing from the last chapter, Julian, holding a baby, finally washes ashore. He's exhausted and wounded, but his mind is set on one thing: finding food and shelter. He knows he must protect this child, whom he decides to name Diana. However, his body is at its limit. Dizzy from blood loss and starvation, Julian can barely think straight as he stumbles forward, his strength failing him. Just as he's about to collapse, he's discovered by an energetic young girl carrying a spear. She's surprised to find a wounded man in such a remote place, but she's even more shocked to see he's carrying a baby. Suddenly, a massive, armored figure appears, rattling with every step. Wary of any potential threat, Julian instinctively shields the baby and tells the newcomer to stand back. But the girl, Titi, runs to the armored man, calling him Angval. Angval ignores Julian's defensive posture and immediately assesses the situation, noticing Julian's grave injuries and asking what happened. With the memory of Myra's sacrifice fresh in his mind, Julian explains that she died in his place so that he and the baby could live on. Angval's response is practical and compassionate. He states that babies need milk to live and that they have some to spare, urging Julian to follow him. He also notes that Julian's own wounds need tending, making it clear that he can't, in good conscience, leave them to die. He gestures for them to come, offering a path to safety. They arrive at a sturdy-looking house by a lake. Angval immediately takes charge, ordering Titi to bring bandages, clothes, and other supplies to care for the two survivors. As Angval tends to his wounds, he can't help but wonder what could have happened for someone so young to be in such a horrific state. He notices something strange about the healing process. Angval observes that a wound he thought was fresh is already closing up. Julian, meanwhile, reflects internally. He realizes that not only did he breathe underwater during the fight, but his body is now more resilient, his injuries healing with unnatural speed. Julian understands that the more he uses this mysterious power, the more his body adapts to it. His thoughts are interrupted as Angval hands him a fresh set of clothes. After getting cleaned and dressed, Julian is offered a hot meal. Though his stomach growls, his past experiences make him hesitate, and he explains that he has no money to pay for their kindness. Titi simply tells him to eat. Julian, still struggling to comprehend their charity, asks Angval why he's doing so much for them. Angval's answer is simple: caring for children is a natural instinct that doesn't require a reason. Angval's words remind Julian of what Mira had told him about maintaining one's pride as a human. Finally letting his guard down, he accepts their help and offers a genuine, heartfelt thank you. Julian fully embraces his new role as Diana's caregiver. He carefully feeds her goat's milk with a cloth, asking Titi for help as he learns to provide for the baby's needs. They are offered a room to rest in, and Julian silently vows to repay this immense kindness one day. With the immediate danger past, they formally introduce themselves: Angval, Titi, and Julian, holding baby Diana. Finally feeling safe, the full weight of his ordeal crashes down on Julian. He collapses into bed, utterly exhausted, and instantly falls into a deep sleep. But his rest is short-lived. In the dead of night, Diana wakes up, her loud cries echoing through the quiet home. A sleep-deprived and frustrated Julian struggles to soothe the crying baby. At his wits' end, he decides to take her outside, hoping the cool night air might calm her down. Careful not to wake the soundly sleeping Titi, Julian quietly slips out of the house and wanders into the darkness, alone with his newfound, and very loud, responsibility. Outside, he comes across Angval's heavy armor, left near a chopping block for the night. After a brief glance, he turns his attention back to comforting the still crying Diana. His walk takes him down to the lake, where he is startled to see a figure bathing in the water. As the person turns, Julian is shocked to realize it's Angval, whose armor had concealed a distinctly female form. Julian stammers, admitting he hadn't realized she was a woman. Angval explains that she has a duty as a soldier to her country and never goes out without her armor, a statement of responsibility that seems to weigh on Julian's own conscience. The next morning, as Diana begins to cry again, Angval watches Julian's troubled expression. Sensing his inner turmoil, she moves past the simple issue of a crying baby and asks him a direct question: is there something weighing on his conscience? Angval's question opens the floodgates. Julian confesses the guilt that's been eating away at him, saying it's all his fault that Diana's mother died in his place. He can see the accusation in Angval's eyes every time she looks at the baby. He looks down at the sleeping Diana, his heart heavy with regret. If only he had stopped Mira back then, she would still be alive. The guilt overwhelms him, and he grits his teeth in anguish. He believes that he should have died instead of Mira, imagining the life they could have had as a proper mother and daughter. Angval challenges his rigid belief, explaining that family isn't determined by blood. She and Titi aren't related, but they are a family nonetheless. She tells him that family is what you make of it. She then turns the question back on him, asking what kind of family he wants to create for Diana, and what sort of life he envisions for her. The question forces Julian to look beyond his guilt and towards the future. Sitting alone with his thoughts, Julian finds his answer. He wants to give Diana all the things he never had, and all the things that were stolen from him. He pictures Mira in his mind as he lists the basic dignities he was denied: a home, enough food to eat, freedom, and wealth. And finally, he lands on the most important thing of all: love. He wants to show Diana a world free from suffering, where she can live without any worries. Angval acknowledges that this is a monumental task. She tells him that to achieve this dream, he will have to fight with all his strength, on Diana's behalf. When Julian asks what he will have to fight, Angval gives a simple, sobering answer: this unforgiving world. A montage of his past suffering flashes in his mind: the pain, the loss, the despair. Angval's voice cuts through the memories, telling him that in this life, there is no time to hesitate, and no room for guilt. She gives him a new purpose. He needs to give his all to survive and raise Diana. By giving her a happy life, Angval suggests, maybe one day he'll be able to forgive himself. To do that, Angval says, he needs to earn a living. She bluntly states that money is a surefire way to achieve his goals, and that he should trust her on this: money can buy happiness. Julian is taken aback by her pragmatism. But that can wait. For now, Angval gently pats his head and tells him that he should rest and recover from his ordeal. She tells him not to try to do everything on his own while he's still full of grief. She promises to take care of them until his wounds have healed. Overwhelmed, Julian can only offer another quiet thank you. Julian asks about the size of their group, and Angval laughs, saying it's only around 100, which to her is a hell of a lot of people. The story jumps forward 6 months. A cheerful Titi runs out into the forest, calling for Julian and telling him that lunch is ready. A healthier and happier-looking Julian replies from the trees, holding a babbling Diana in his arms. The past 6 months have clearly been kind to them. As he walks, Diana suddenly points towards the woods and begins to fuss, as if she has seen something strange among the trees. Julian looks but sees nothing. He tries to reassure Diana, telling her there's nothing there, but the baby continues to cry, unsettled by what she saw. But Diana was right. Hidden in the shadowy depths of the forest, a strange, demonic-looking ram with glowing spiral eyes watches them, a clear sign of lurking danger. The sight triggers a painful flashback for Julian, to a time when he was a child slave, not even treated as a person. His cruel owners talk about disposing of him once he's no longer useful. The memory continues, with one of his owners callously remarking that Julian had hit rock bottom after being sold off by his own mother. The flashback ends with the man's cruel assertion that Julian would be better off dead. Snapping back to the present, a determined Julian tells Angvol that he wants to find work, having relied on her for the past 6 months. Julian, filled with a new sense of purpose, states his desire to earn money to repay Angvol and build a future for Diana. Seeing his resolve, Angvol agrees and points the way, suggesting they inquire for work at a nearby village. The villagers' leader remains skeptical, stating that they don't trust outsiders and Julian doesn't look cut out for the job. Desperate, Julian pleads that he can work and asks how he can prove that he won't drag them down. The man points to a collapsed cave entrance, their iron mine. He gives Julian an impossible trial: remove all the boulders blocking the entrance within a single day. He adds a cruel warning that the boulders get larger the deeper he goes. Angvol immediately protests, saying that's an unreasonable task that even a grown adult couldn't complete. But the villager coldly replies that no one is forcing Julian to do it. Despite the insane difficulty and Angvol's concern, Julian's resolve doesn't waver. For Diana's future, he accepts the challenge without hesitation. As the villagers watch, Julian begins the arduous task. He lifts the first rock with surprising ease, thinking to himself that it's a piece of cake. The village leader watches impassively, noting that's one down. But the work soon becomes a grueling ordeal. Julian strains with every fiber of his being, letting out a primal roar as he lifts a massive stone onto his back, his body pushed to its absolute limit. He works relentlessly, and by midday, he has cleared a little over half the boulders. The crowd of villagers, including a worried Titi and Angvol, who holds a sleeping Diana, watch his unyielding effort. Finally, his body gives out. He collapses in exhaustion, his legs wobbling and then failing completely. Crying in frustration, he realizes he can't move his limbs anymore and curses his own weakness. Just as despair begins to set in, he looks over and sees Diana, babbling happily. The sight of her innocent face ignites his resolve once more. For her, he has to keep going. He gets back up and continues, one painful stone at a time. He continues the Sisyphean task, his body screaming in protest as he grips a heavy sack of rocks and strains to move it from the cave. With his legs having given out completely, Julian is reduced to crawling. He drags the immense weight behind him, gasping for every breath as he pulls himself forward through the dirt. Titi calls his name, her voice filled with worry. Julian lies motionless on the ground, his transformed arm throbbing with power and pain. He has pushed himself past his breaking point. As he lies in the dirt, doubt begins to creep in. He wonders what he's even doing, questioning if he really needs to torture himself to this degree just to prove a point. Just as he is about to give in to despair, a hand suddenly yanks him up from the ground, stopping him. It's the villagers from Angvol's community. They've stepped forward, telling him to use them and offering to give him a hand with the rest of the work. One of them says that with everyone helping, it will be no sweat. But as they offer their kindness, something within Julian cracks, his face contorting in a mixture of pain and resistance. He looks at his own trembling hand and reflects on a painful truth: whenever he's in a bind, someone always seems to step in and save him. He feels he's never been able to accomplish anything by his own strength. Just like on the slave ship, he's just a kid being kept alive by the efforts of others. With tears of frustration streaming down his face, he shouts at them, "Don't go easy on me." He feels that if he can't even be trusted to handle this task by himself, he'll never find peace. He remembers Myra's smiling face and her final words, entrusting her child to him. This is a promise he has to fulfill, and he has to do it alone. The members of his community look on with concern, but they respect his desperate need to prove himself and do not interfere. Julian screams with raw determination. This isn't just about clearing rocks anymore. He believes there's no meaning to this trial, or to his survival, if he doesn't see it through by himself. Even the hostile villagers begin to murmur that he's done enough and someone should stop him. But Angvol blocks their path, silencing them. "You're the ones who started this," she says grimly. "Just shut up and watch." As the sun sets, casting long shadows over the village, the crowd stands in silent witness to Julian's impossible struggle. Night falls. Julian stands, exhausted but triumphant, before the completely cleared mine entrance. He turns to face the stunned villagers, having accomplished the impossible through sheer force of will. His body is screaming in agony, but his eyes burn with unwavering resolve. He looks at the stunned villagers and announces, "That's all of them." The man who gave him the impossible task can only stare in disbelief. He humbly admits, "I was wrong. You're more than qualified for the job." As a sign of respect, he tosses Julian a bag of coins. He welcomes Julian as a fellow worker, telling him they'd be glad to have him. Holding his hard-earned compensation, Julian manages a small, genuine smile, a sign that he has finally earned a place for himself and Diana. Later, Julian takes the old, tattered shirt he wore as a slave, a symbol of his past suffering and powerlessness, and carefully lays it in a freshly dug grave. He then hoists a heavy wooden cross, planting it firmly at the head of the grave. He kneels before this makeshift memorial, ready to find closure. He prays, speaking directly to Mira. He tells her that by burying his old self, he can now move forward. He asks her to be at peace and to watch over him and Diana, reaffirming his promise to build a new life for them. Back at the house, a joyful shout erupts from Julian. He calls for Angsval and Titi to come and look. To their delight, baby Diana is crawling for the very first time. Titi can't help but joke that Diana is already a better crawler than Julian was during his ordeal. Julian gives Titi an annoyed look for her savage comment, but is even more surprised to see Angsval letting out a quiet laugh. It's a light-hearted, happy moment shared between them. The chapter closes on this peaceful scene, Julian holding Diana, Titi playing nearby, and Angsval watching over them like a guardian. They have become a true family, collecting little moments of happiness together. The scene opens on a peaceful village, showcasing the daily lives of its inhabitants. We are introduced to Marie, a woman with braided hair, who is the wet nurse for the baby Diana. As Marie tends to the child, Julian, a young woman with long, wavy blonde hair, and Joseph, a bearded man, are seen working nearby. Joseph wipes sweat from his brow, introduced as Marie's husband and Julian's workmate. He's described as a good man who treats Julian as an equal. We see Julian focused on her task of chopping firewood for the village. Julian pauses her work, taking a moment to appreciate her surroundings. She finds joy and fulfillment in her new life, enjoying the beautiful scenery and fresh air of the forest, reflecting that time flies when you're working of your own free will. Later, Marie holds Diana while her own child sleeps nearby. Joseph chats with Julian, noting that their children are the same age and remarking on how exciting it is. Joseph smiles, confident that Diana and his child will grow up to be the best of friends. Julian agrees, but her expression is strangely blank and wide-eyed, a stark contrast to Joseph's cheerful demeanor. It's lunchtime, and the group gathers for a meal. A newcomer in dark, fur-lined armor, Angsval, joins them. She asks if they've noticed anything unusual in the forest recently, shifting the peaceful mood to one of concern. Joseph begins to speak about the woods. Joseph explains that while they only use the outskirts for hunting and firewood, his father warned him about the forest's depths. He describes it as a vast unknown, a sacred domain for gods and beings beyond their comprehension. He finishes with an ominous warning: no man who steps foot there can ever return. Angsval reveals a personal connection, stating she has tried to visit her father who hides within that very forest, but he wanted nothing to do with her. Hearing her story, Joseph offers to try and arrange a meeting for Angsval with her father. Angsval accepts his offer, a glimmer of hope in her eyes. As they talk, another villager asks Angsval why she is investigating the woods, which she calls Angsval. She replies with a serious expression that the king himself requested it, and it is her duty and honor to see it through. The villagers are stunned to learn that Angsval serves the king. When she reveals that he has ruled the country for over 100 years, Julian is visibly shocked by the impossibility of it. Angsval elaborates, explaining that she doesn't know the secret to his longevity, but the king has protected the country throughout his reign by using mysterious, godlike powers. The citizens hail the king as the Supreme Lord. He is depicted as a shadowy figure on a grand throne. Angval adds that one of his closest aides is a prophetess who supports him from the shadows. We see a cloaked figure, and Julian's shocked expression deepens. Angval delivers the grim news: the prophetess has foreseen the king's death. The scene shifts to a vision of the prophetess addressing the king, prophesying that darkness will engulf the world, leading to his demise as his guiding star fades. The prophetess's face is revealed, showing a striking resemblance to Julian. She warns the king that he must seek and destroy a calamity that will appear in the forest. Should he fail, he will be the one who is destroyed. Returning to the present, Angval tells the group that the king has tremendous, unwavering trust in the prophetess, as her predictions have never been wrong. The villagers listen with concern. Angval reveals her personal motivation for her loyalty. When she was very young, the king saved her and her family, and she is now forever indebted to him. Because of this debt, she became a soldier to serve her king and country. Julian asks if she has to investigate the forest by herself, but Angval clarifies that she is not alone. The country's scholars and soldiers are all investigating the prophecy. Later, Angval visits her father, an old man nicknamed Pops, to ask him about the woods. The old man, who is preparing food, seems startled by her serious inquiry. Angval presses her father, asking him to tell her about the strange tales he's heard about the forest. He looks down at his meal, considering his response with a weary expression. Angval's father seems shaken by her question. He dismisses the stories as mere tales people make up to understand what they don't know, stories of fairies, monsters, evil spirits, and witches. He claims he can't say if they're true or not. He gives Angval a stern warning, advising that if they leave the beings of the forest alone, they can coexist peacefully. He tells her not to go poking around the forest recklessly, his gaze intense. That evening, Joseph says goodbye, mentioning he's going hunting tomorrow. Elsewhere, Julian holds baby Diana, admiring her smile and her love for the night breeze. Suddenly, baby Diana makes a noise and raises her hand towards the dark woods. Julian looks back with a flicker of concern but sees nothing there. Deciding it's just the evening chill, she turns to head back inside, trying to dismiss the strange moment. Despite her efforts to ignore it, Julian can't shake a feeling of doubt. She hesitates, looking back at the dark, silent forest one last time, questioning if there truly was nothing there. The scene pulls away, showing the quiet village nestled against the ominous woods, its tranquility feeling fragile and temporary. The fragile peace of the village is shattered. A crowd has gathered as panic hunters return from the forest. One man, clearly distressed, tries to make sense of the chaotic chatter, demanding they get to the point. One of the hunters delivers the terrible news: Joseph is gone, taken by something in the forest while he was checking his rabbit traps. When pressed for details, the hunter admits he doesn't know what took him, only that it happened suddenly. A stark, violent image flashes, showing Joseph being thrown through the air, his body contorted as he's viciously attacked by an unseen force in the darkness of the woods. As the hunters panic, unsure of what to do without Joseph, the heavily armored Angval steps in. He calms them down and takes charge, ordering them to organize a search party to sweep the outer edges of the forest. While the others prepare to search the outskirts, Angval declares that he will go look for Joseph in the dangerous depths of the forest. Hearing this, Joseph's father, Pops, declares he's going too, stating no one knows the forest better. Titi and Julian also look on with resolve. Marie, with tears in her eyes, formally tells Pops that it's his son, Joseph, who has disappeared. The old man's expression is grim but steady. He states that if it's Joseph, they have nothing to fear, as he taught his son everything about surviving in that forest since he was a boy. Pops confidently assures the villagers that Joseph is alive. His eyes then fall on a bough carried by one of the other hunters, and he points, asking if it's his, suggesting that Joseph would not have left it behind willingly. Julian watches, internally conflicted, knowing she could help if she used her powers. However, Angval senses her thoughts and shuts her down immediately, telling her, absolutely not. Undeterred, Julian turns to the warrior Angval and declares, I'm going with you, too. Angval overrides her, telling her they don't have time to argue. He instructs Titi to take Julian and the baby Diana back home to wait. Titi quietly agrees. As they walk away from the departing search party, Julian looks back with a worried expression. Titi, trying to comfort her, asks if the search party will be okay. Titi continues to worry, asking if Angvol will come home safely. Julian remains silent, her face a mask of distress as she holds a stirring Diana. Julian is hit by a wave of traumatic memories. She flashes back to happy images of the village families, Angvol and Titi, Marie and Joseph with their child. This is violently contrasted with the memory of her own past, covered in blood and tears while holding the newborn Diana moments after her mother's death. The weight of her past solidifies her resolve. Standing alone against a desolate landscape, Julian clenches her fist, tormented by the thought of watching another child lose their parent. Her decision made, Julian turns back. She calls out to Titi, handing baby Diana over to her. With a look of fierce determination, she tells her, "I'm going with them," and promises that everything will be okay. As Julian walks away, a powerful energy bursts forth. The scars on her face crackle and glow with a strange power. Titi and Diana can only watch in shock as Julian awakens a power made for fighting the unknown. In the middle of the woods, the wisdom of coexistence with the forest is passed down from father to son. Pops, a veteran hunter, teaches young Julian the ways of the wild. This chapter is titled, Demonic Beast. While tracking a deer, Pops signals to Julian with a tap of his finger. He explains that this hand signal means he's going to distract the beast. Julian gets the message. Pops tells him that hunters often use this signal, so he should remember it. Later, the hunt is successful, and Pops begins to prepare the carcass. As Julian watches him work, he wipes sweat from his brow and wonders aloud if he'll ever become a master huntsman like Pops. In response, Pops tells him that he doesn't have to be a master huntsman. Pops continues his lesson, explaining that what matters most is returning to your family in one piece and not letting the forest swallow you up. He elaborates that while it's every hunter's wish to die in the woods, it brings hardship for the family left behind. He's witnessed many of his friends die here and doesn't want to lose Julian too. Julian looks at him earnestly and says the same goes for him. Pops shouldn't leave him behind either. Touched by his words, Pops smiles and calls him a cheeky fella. Later, the mood shifts. Pops, Julian, and a heavily armored warrior named Angvol are tracking something. Pops examines the trail and notes that while there isn't a lot of blood, it looks like the prey has been dragged to its den. Angvol asks what kind of beast did this. Pops, looking concerned, admits that he's never seen footprints like these before and that they better proceed with caution. The group presses on, moving quickly through the trees. Julian is impressed that even at his age, Pops weaves through the forest like it's nothing. Pops warns that the forest distorts one's sense of time and space, so they must pay attention to the path and the sun's position. Their path leads them through a swamp. Angvol, taking the lead, tells the others to stay close behind and not to fall in, as the swamps are bottomless. Suddenly, a loud rustling comes from the bushes, and a large bear emerges, letting out a low growl. Angvol immediately signals for everyone to stop. The bear rises on its hind legs, growling defensively. Pops readies himself, telling them not to move. Pops draws his bow and aims at the bear. He sternly tells it to back off, saying he doesn't have time to deal with it. The bear seems to understand. It turns and retreats into the woods. Pops lowers his bow, remarking that it was a close one and that he forgot to bring the bell that keeps bears away. Looking shaken, Angvol asks if they are going to be okay. Pops turns back with a reassuring grin, telling them to settle their nerves because even if his mind is muddled, he never misses a shot. As they venture deeper, the forest grows darker. Julian crouches, noting that he doesn't recognize the beast's scent. It isn't a bear or a boar. Angvol adds that they are in an area unfamiliar to them, where no sunlight reaches. Angvol continues, observing that the further they go in, the more alien the forest becomes. The air is stagnant, and the roots of the trees look twisted and unnatural, like the legs of a centipede. Finally, they arrive at a clearing and are met with a horrifying sight. A massive, ancient tree stands before them, its thick roots spreading across the ground. From its branches hang dozens of mutilated corpses. The bodies are desiccated and disfigured, their faces frozen in silent screams. Looking upon the gruesome display, Pops can only utter a curse in disbelief and horror. Suddenly, Angval spots their quarry at the base of the tree. It's the missing hunter, Joseph. He's alive, but barely. He looks up at them with terror in his eyes and warns them to stay back, that it's a trap. As Joseph is dragged back by the roots, the tree itself begins to transform. A writhing mass of flesh, claws, and wolf-like heads erupts from its trunk, snapping and snarling. The hunters are frozen in shock. The monstrous creature speaks, its multiple mouths moving in unison. It mockingly says what a shame, that they thought he would come. It reveals they were expecting someone else, but our heroes fell right into their trap. They only need one of them as bait. Julian calls out to Pops in fear as the true horror of their situation sinks in. Pop's face is covered in a cold sweat, his mind struggling to process the scene. Angval is equally horrified, wondering aloud if she's trapped in a nightmare. The monster then reveals the bodies of its other victims, showing them to Pops. His eyes widen in horrified recognition as he sees the familiar clothing. He whispers their names in despair, realizing they are his friends from long ago, that, Ruth, and Joseph. The monstrous tree dangles the corpses of Pop's friends like puppets, sadistically asking if he likes what it's done. It calls this gruesome display its little hobby. As the beast tears one of the bodies, it gloats about how easily frightened humans are. It loves listening to their cries before bed, calling them the perfect lullaby. Pops can only stare in silent fury. The monster continues its psychological torture, reminiscing about how hilarious it was to hang them up. A flashback shows Pops in happier times, sharing a drink and laughing with those very same friends. The beast cruelly mimics their final pleas, "I don't want to die. I have to see my daughter, and I want to go back home." It laughs manically, saying they all sobbed and wailed like fools until they died, and it just can't get enough of it. Pop's face darkens with rage. The creature's many heads grin maliciously. It feigns benevolence, asking why they have such long faces when it's just going to hang them up with their friends so they can all be together. It taunts them, saying there's nothing to fear when they're reunited. Pops clenches his fist, his body trembling with a rage he never thought he could harbor at his old age. Julian looks on in concern, calling out his name. His eyes burning with hatred, Pops states that he has accepted the natural order of life, eat or be eaten. As a hunter, he has always been prepared for death. But he glares at the beast, declaring with conviction that there is nothing natural about it. It's not a predator, it's nothing but a cold-blooded killer. The beast roars in agreement and lunges forward, smashing its massive arm into the ground. The force of the impact sends shockwaves through the forest, shattering the earth. Pops and Julian are thrown back by the attack. Wounded and struggling, Pops wonders aloud how one can even fight an evil so removed from any food chain. The scene suddenly changes. An unknown threat approaches. A young person with long, light-colored hair kneels on the ground, realizing they need to sharpen their senses instead of running randomly. The title reads, Chapter 7, Hunting. This mysterious person searches for Angval, but their hunt is interrupted by the rustle of bushes. A bear charges out, roaring aggressively. The person prepares for a fight. With incredible strength, the long-haired youth leaps onto the charging bear and lands a powerful punch, sending the animal flying. They dash away, leaving the stunned bear behind. The scene cuts back abruptly to the main group. The massive armored warrior, Angval, grabs Pops, shouting for Angval as the female archer is flung through the air by an unseen force. Angval, the archer, expertly twists in mid-air and fires an arrow. It strikes the multi-headed beast with explosive force, causing it to reel back in pain. The group uses the opening to retreat. Julian now carries the injured Angval on his shoulders. Angval, running alongside, calls out to Joseph, confirming that the monster tracks them through sound and scent. She asked what was inside the bag Pops was carrying. Pops reveals his desperate plan. The bag contained medicinal herbs and aromatic ingredients he gathered from the forest, which will block the beast's sense of smell for a short while. But he doesn't have much time. He plans to use his own blood as a decoy to turn the tables. Pops gives Angvol a cloth, telling her to soak it with his blood and cover herself with it to mask her own scent. This blood-soaked cloth will be the bait. As they prepare, the sound of the approaching beast echoes through the woods. The monster crashes through the forest, drawn by the potent smell of blood. Pops holds the decoy, believing that if the monster is just an animal, they have a shot. But his hope shatters as the beast closes the distance with terrifying speed. It's too late. A massive, hairy hand descends upon them, grabbing both Julian and the armored Angsval in its grasp. The two are thrown violently, crashing through trees and landing hard on the ground. The beast, its sense of smell confused by the decoy, searches for them among the wreckage. Its multiple heads snap and crack, frustrated that it can't find them. It roars that it wanted to have them while they were still alive. On the ground, Pops coughs up blood, heavily wounded. From a distance, Julian watches his injured mentor. Seeing Pop's bloodied face, a fire of determination ignites within him. He clenches his fist and glares toward the beast. Julian gets to his feet. Bruised but resolute, he wraps a piece of cloth around his hand, holding a small knife, preparing to confront the monster himself. Pops looks on, concerned. Julian dashes forward, drawing the creature's attention. The beast spots him and swipes with its massive claws, but Julian throws a rock as a distraction, narrowly dodging the attack. The beast roars in fury from the explosion, shocked at the turn of events. Julian realizes they were tricked, as the beast's arms reach for the bag he threw. The large armored warrior, Angsval, realizes their predicament as he sinks into the marsh. They're in the bottomless swamp. The beast sinks with them, but it grabs onto a branch, planning to pull its body out. Enraged, it screams that it won't just hang them, it will tear them to shreds and scatter their remains in the swamp. Seeing the beast's arm reaching for them, Julian desperately yells for Pops not to miss his shot. With incredible skill, Pops takes aim and fires his arrow, splitting the creature's appendage. As the severed limb crashes into the swamp, Pops stands tall, reminding Julian that even if his mind is muddled, he never misses a shot. The group makes it to solid ground. Pops quietly apologizes to his fallen friends, lamenting that he cannot retrieve their bodies. Julian rushes to his side, but Pops brushes off his concern, pointing out that Julian is also pretty tattered. Before they can catch their breath, a new horror erupts from the swamp. A humanoid figure, clad in a dark cloak and adorned with wooden branches, emerges from the murky water. Pops stares in shock. This new foe, a forest avatar of the Supreme Lord, stands before them. It fixes its gaze on the wounded hunters, who can only look on in disbelief and terror. The forest avatar immediately attacks, lunging at the injured Angsval and Pops with terrifying speed. Pops and Angsval are cornered, with the creature raising its blade-like arm to strike them down. Julian screams for it to stop, rushing forward to try and save his friends. But in that moment, something awakens in Julian. With a burst of newfound power, he moves with impossible speed, kicking the forest avatar away just in the nick of time, saving Pops and Angsval from certain death. Pops and Julian look on in astonishment at this transformed version of Julian, who now crackles with a dark energy. Angsval recognizes him, realizing that Julian now holds the power to fight back. The scene shifts to a title page for Chapter 8, To Be Human. The transformed Julian faces off against the forest avatar. The caption reads, "Now's the time to stand up and protect his loved ones." Back in the fight, Julian stands protectively in front of his friends, telling everyone to get behind him. He says he's glad he made it in time. The forest avatar addresses Julian, calling him an intruder. It states that his situation is dire and that invading the forest is unforgivable for beings who belong to the sea. The creature's true, monstrous face is revealed beneath its hood, a swirling mass of grotesque flesh. It snarls its ultimate threat, "I'll kill you, and the baby." This threat is the final straw. Julian's eyes burn with rage. He tells the beast that it's the one who doesn't understand, and he'll make it eat its words. He then dashes forward to attack. Julian moves like a blur, easily dodging the creature's frantic attacks. He closes the distance and lands a devastating punch that sends the forest avatar flying. The avatar is slammed into the ground, defeated in a single blow. Angsval, watching from the side, is speechless. He can't comprehend Julian's unbelievable speed and power. The creature tries to retreat, using the trees as cover. But Julian is relentless, anticipating its moves and cutting off its escape. The avatar lunges from a tree, but Julian is already there, meeting its attack with a powerful punch that sends it crashing back down. Julian gracefully dodges another wild swing from the creature, using its momentum against it and countering with a powerful kick. He follows up with another brutal punch. The impact crunches and cracks the avatar's wooden face, but Julian senses an unnatural resilience beneath the surface, realizing this foe isn't just a mindless beast. Julian lands nimbly, ignoring Angsval's cry that he's bleeding. His own wounds are irrelevant. His focus is entirely on the enemy, watching as the damage he inflicted begins to unnaturally mend. The forest avatar retreats to a distance, wary of Julian's power but already preparing its next move. As Julian studies his opponent, he understands its abilities. The forest avatar can move freely by hiding underground and inside trees. It can also heal its own wounds. But Julian's resolve is unshakable. He declares that he is stronger and vows to smash the creature to pieces before it can burrow itself again. The avatar's body cracks and snaps, preparing a new attack. Suddenly, the creature unleashes a deadly surprise. It fires a barrage of sharp, wooden shards from its body, sending them flying towards Julian and his friends. Julian instinctively leaps in front of the others to shield them, but the shards pierce his body mid-air. Angsval screams his name in horror. He's impaled by dozens of the sharp projectiles. Angsval cries out, telling Julian he doesn't have to protect them and that he's done enough. But Julian remains standing, blood dripping from his wounds. The pain triggers a memory from his past as a slave. He flashes back to being brutally beaten by his master, who called him a worthless piece of garbage and a freeloader for daring to defy him. He remembers the hopelessness of his situation. Whether he was rebellious or obedient, it didn't matter. There was nothing he could do to please his cruel master, who would beat him for any reason. The flashback continues. A younger, more innocent Julian finds another slave beaten and discarded in a stable. He cautiously approaches and asks if he's okay. But his act of kindness is met with fury. His master appears, a menacing grin on his face, angry that Julian dared to try and help someone. For trying to help, he was beaten senseless. It was then he learned a bitter lesson: nothing good ever came from helping others. It was better not to even think about it, because he would just get beaten. That old belief, that helping others brought nothing good, echoes in his mind as he sees the image of the dying pups. But now, standing bloodied but defiant, he thinks of Angsval, who saved him and Diana when they washed ashore, telling him that adults don't need a reason to care for children. He reflects on this, realizing it doesn't matter whether you're a child or an adult. He confesses that he has always hated himself for doing nothing and just watching others suffer. A single tear, mixed with blood, rolls down his cheek as his resolve hardens. He now understands that he, too, wants to help the people he cares for. He thinks of all the people who have helped him since he arrived in this new land, the villagers, his friends, his new family. He came to this realization only after being helped by so many. With newfound conviction, Julian declares that he now believes helping others is what it means to be human. He then charges at the startled forest avatar one more time. Julian taunts the creature, revealing he wasn't just wasting time. He figured out its weakness: there's a limit to the number of thorns it can throw, and it needs to charge up before each attack. Dodging the projectiles, he closes in, shouting, "I've got you now." He grabs the creature, slices off its arm, and hurls it into the air. He screams in defiance, leaping after it, declaring that there is nowhere to escape in the sky. With a final, devastating punch, Julian pours all of his newfound strength and conviction into a single blow. He obliterates the forest avatar, his power exploding as he fully embraces his role as a protector for those close to him.